Hi, and welcome to SPE Live and today's broadcast, New Horizons. Who is the Energy Workforce and Technology Council? Joining me shortly will be Leslie Beyer, CEO of the Energy Workforce and Technology Council. And we will be discussing the interests and roles of oil and gas and energy service companies in the energy transition. So how the sector can continue to help meet rising world energy demand while improving safety, environmental performance, and profitability. We'll also take a look at the returning activity to the oil patch and how the economic recovery creates new models of working and new opportunities. My name is Nils Kogsalo, and it's my pleasure to be your host for today. And if you're new to SPE Live, check us out on social media, #SPE Live, or find us on spe.org. Now, let us meet our guest today, Leslie Beyer, CEO of the Energy Workforce and Technology Council. She leads strategic development of the Council's work to empower the energy workforce of the future. Working with the Council's Board of Directors, she serves as primary advocate for the energy services sector and the key role it plays in providing reliable, affordable, cleaner energy to the world. Other highlights from Leslie's career include 15 years in Washington, D.C., serving in the U.S. Senate, the White House, Executive Office of the President, U.S. State Department, and U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Leslie, welcome to SPE Live.
Thank you, Nils. Good morning.
Good morning. Good to have you back again. So thank you for joining us today and making the time. Very much looking forward to talking with you about the future of the oil field and the energy service sector.
Right.
Absolutely. And a quick reminder to our audience out there. So fingers on buzzers and keyboards, questions and comments about oil field services, energy services, their role in the energy transition. So you have comments and questions and concerns. Now is your chance to share. So please share with us on the social media chat boxes, and we look forward to seeing what you have to say. Leslie, let's begin with the Energy Workforce and Technology Council, newly formed organization. So what is it and why?
So the Energy Workforce and Technology Council is the combined organization of formerly PESA, which was the Petroleum Equipment and Services Association, and the AESC, the Association of Energy Services Companies. So both of those organizations have been around for over 75 years. And both really did a lot of work to advocate for the supply chain in oil and gas. Suppliers, service providers, manufacturers, the OEMs, every level there really of the supply chain. The AESC had about 600 member companies that were very geographically spread out across the US. They're domestically focused. And then PESA, the organization, the legacy organization that I ran, was more global in nature. We worked with about 200 of the global energy service providers. We have international chapters in Dubai, one in Argentina, and do quite a bit of work in Canada and Mexico. So really is more of a global organization advocating for oilfield services and energy technology companies in that space as PESA, and then combining with the domestically focused suppliers from the AESC. We are now 600 companies. It gives us a lot more scale to advocate more effectively, and also to really contribute to more best practice sharing in the context of the energy transition. So I know we're going to talk about that, but what the council really advocates for is an inclusive energy transition, an energy transition that includes our workforce. You know, those familiar with OFS and that sector knows that's where the bulk of the energy workforce is. And so it's really our mission to take care of that workforce, to continue to provide development opportunities, and also to advocate. And that advocating, that government affairs piece happens not only at the federal level in the US, but also local, state issues, as well as international trade issues for our global companies. So we're very excited about that.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds amazing. You got this sort of additional scale to the organization. So you mentioned there about sort of an inclusive energy transition. Can you tell us more about that piece?
Sure. I think the main point that we're really focused on this energy transition is that we need to have a seat at the table, the traditional oil and gas workers, especially since in our sector, a lot of the low carbon technology is driven by this workforce. You know, the quickest way to lower carbon, to lower efficiencies is really, you know, what's coming out of OFS and these energy technology companies that are engaged across energies. So for us, when we look at the companies that we work with, the technologies that they're developing, the way they're getting to low carbon, they are entirely a part of the energy transition. Energy transition is not a binary choice, an either or, you know, oil and gas or renewables. It's not. This workforce works across energies. And so, you know, we look at energy transition as an opportunity for these companies to embrace and to see actual commercial opportunity in investing in some of these other technologies. And when you really look at it, you know, the oil and gas supply chain, the technologies in that supply chain are not that different than the renewable supply chain. Petrochemicals, of course, are critical in a number of the renewables. So that's just starts as a baseline. But then transportation, you know, all that happens within that supply chain, this workforce supports. And it's not just oil and gas. Like I said, it's across energies, but we really try and make sure that we're looking at an inclusive energy transition that includes this workforce, because they're the ones that know how to develop energy at scale. They have developed energy at scale for years, and they're going to continue to do that. And their skill set will be needed, especially as we accelerate into automation, digitalization. You know, our workforce is increasingly focused on data analytics. These high-tech jobs, they're exciting. You know, it's a good time to come into energy, but you have to understand energy in the broader context, that it includes oil and gas, it includes renewables, and the sweet spot is found in the mix.
Yeah, absolutely. I really understand what you're saying there. So now you've mentioned advocacy as being an important part of your role as an organization. So advocacy, obviously, is sort of in terms of representing your organizations, but also to state and federal, as you mentioned, but also, I guess, advocating the industry to new hires, you know, students, that sort of thing. Talk to us a little bit about that advocacy role that you have.
So the first part of it, the government affairs piece, we have a team run by Tim Tarpley, who's our Executive Vice President of Government Relations. He and his team work to make sure that any piece of legislation, or especially in the current environment, a regulatory action, that our members know about it, that they know how to adjust and adapt to it. And in a best case scenario, that they're already in a situation where they're executing on any coming up regulation. So if it's a regulation on methane, but most recently we've seen, for example, the ban of federal lands, the moratorium. So at that point, our government affairs team is working to help educate the administration and members of Congress who can influence the administration on how critical oil and gas development on federal lands is, how it's critical to not only the communities and developing, just the livelihood of those specific communities, specifically in New Mexico, but also, how it contributes to our national security, how our ability to export that natural gas that comes out of the Permian contributes. And so that's a government affairs piece there. Then you mentioned how we advocate for this industry to the broader global community, how we work to show that we're focused on inclusion and equity and diversity, and that this can be an exciting, high-tech industry to work in. We talk about just the moral case for what we do, how oil and gas lifts people out of energy poverty, how there's 2 billion people in this world that don't have reliable access to energy. And oil and gas is an important part of that. And this workforce has something to be proud of and what they contribute. And kind of the conversation around, fossil fuels, we've got to get rid of them. No, that's not the case. that's a very limited view of what the world needs and how the world needs to be powered in an efficient way to take care of everyone, not just the people in the developed OECD countries. So we really work to try and advocate and talk about the moral case behind what we do and how we lift people out of energy poverty.
Thank you. So again, on that note of advocacy, there's been a lot of focus around the US, particularly now the presidential elections, but you've mentioned that you're a global organization as well and have global members.
Yes.
How are you sort of expanding your sphere of influence to other regions with oil and gas and energy interests?
The way we kind of do that is we work with our global members specific in regions. So for example, in the Middle East, suppliers, service providers, they need to understand the context behind all the local content that they're expected to execute on when working with NOCs. And so we really try to provide them with an umbrella group to go in and say, okay, these are the issues that are particular to us. We need to understand exactly the metrics we need to be hitting on local content. There are some specific regional issues that we can look at, and there's specific market dynamics in each of those regions that are interesting to the OFS sector. So our chapter in Dubai gets together, I think, just at least once a quarter, if not every month to 6 weeks, and they kind of look at market conditions. They look at what's happening within the sector in that specific region, and then how they can utilize the infrastructure of our organization to work on their behalf. So one company going to an NOC, one supplier, is not going to necessarily move the needle. 25 companies is a different story. And it's so much more helpful for the companies that we work with to be able to say, look, this is something that is impacting all of us. This is something we all need to learn about. Can we come together as a sector and work with you on this? In Latin America, the situation is a little bit different in the sense that a lot of the operators are looking for JV opportunities. And so it's more of a matchmaking situation there. So it's different in each region. What that chapter works on. We have executive coaching and all of that. We try to provide all the same opportunities that we do to our members who are based stateside and really be able to support them in the regions.
Thank you. So you mentioned before also that's part of the organization's sort of mission is to spread best practices. So they also spread out through these chapters?
They do. They'll come together and say, okay, how is everyone, especially that best practice sharing was so critical this past year in the COVID-19 environment. So I think in the first few weeks of lockdown, there were just ongoing, a call every week with the HSEQ and HR, honestly, departments, probably 75 people calling into one call saying, all right, how are you guys moving your people around? Have you taken them to man camps? Are you putting them in hotels? How are you separating them? What are the operators requiring? What kind of testing? How are you moving people across borders? That information was critical. And so as companies in the sector, walked through it, they would share with the other companies. Here's how we managed this. Here's how we're doing deep cleaning. Here's how we're observing OSHA protocols in these other remote locations. It was a very important time for them to be able to best practice share specific to that kind of emergency environment. And so now they are working on best practice sharing on ESG, for example. Okay, how is everybody, putting together their sustainability reports? What ESG metrics are we using? How are we applying that to safety? Supply chain, all kinds of supply chain issues. It's just a great opportunity, for them to be able to come together in an environment covered by antitrust compliance to be able to share for the betterment of the entire industry in the sector.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. So you mentioned there ESG and sustainability reporting, and earlier you mentioned low carbon technology is being driven by a lot of the oilfield service companies.
Yes.
you tell us a bit more about that, sort of how you're sort of encouraging that amongst your member companies?
Absolutely. So we have we started an ESG actually committee about 3 years ago, but just in this past year, as more and more companies are promoting their technologies that they're using across all energies and lower carbon technologies. We have an energy transition committee. Those companies are all coming together quarterly and saying, okay, here's what we're working on in solar. We're developing, this, and here's what we're working on in carbon capture. And just sharing all of that and promoting it is helping us to really show how these companies are not only oil and gas specific. It's an important part of what they do, but they are investing in other technologies. And an important piece of it is a lot of the operators and the E&P companies that are their customers, they'll say, okay, we have these net zero goals. We want to get there. We think we have an opportunity here. How can you help us get to our net zero goals? That's an increasingly important role of the supplier, to be able to provide transparency in the supply chain and say, these are our emissions. Here's how we're tracking them. This is how it's going to impact you, because a supplier's emissions ultimately, are being reported by the operator, by the leaseholder. So, we're trying to help them really learn how to not only lower their emissions and promoting what they're doing and investing in those technologies, but also how to report it. And above and beyond the environment piece, I think that's where most of the companies, and we did a maturity index across the sector with Accenture, a very specific detailed survey, like where companies are self-identifying that they are in their ESG reporting and their ESG journey. And most companies feel like they're getting pretty far along as far as environmental. They're understanding not only how to reduce emissions, but how to report that. But then in governance and social, we need to move the needle there. And so that's another part of what we offer at the council. D&I training, opportunities to really look at governance and best practice share across that, how we're investing in our communities. Oftentimes, especially in the domestic, but even international, a company comes in, the E&P company, the leaseholder, that's not actually the workforce. It's our people that are engaging in that community. It's the OFS sector, that workforce. And so that's a critical part of ESG, what we're doing in our communities, how we're helping. And so we're just trying to just help provide opportunities for companies to see what their peers are doing, so we can all move the needle forward, so we can all be included in the energy transition, because we all want a lower carbon future, and we're uniquely equipped to contribute to that.
That's great. So you're supporting in that sense. So that's helping the industry hopefully move forward. Now, as we recover from COVID and the oil price crash from last year, those two impacted our industry. We saw a lot of downsizing, remote work arrangements, that sort of thing. As we recover, what's changed? Because traditionally the oilfield service sector, was squeezed before the impact of COVID and everything because of the oil price and stuff. It's being squeezed again. What's the outlook for the oilfield service sector and also the energy services sector? Are we going to still see that squeeze? Or what are your thoughts?
We definitely feel that squeeze. Pricing and margins really for the oilfield services sector have not returned since 2014. It's been difficult for them to generate revenue and to be able to return that into R&D, right? But they were still doing it even with these razor thin margins. The oilfield services sector lost 100,000 jobs last year because of the COVID environment. And a lot of that, it was the market issues, but also the driving of the digitalization and automation is going to naturally make us be a leaner sector moving forward. A lot of calls across the sector for M&A. And so OFS will definitely be smaller. It will be leaner, it will be more efficient, and it will be the technology driver. And so that's, it's an unfortunate reality in the sense that it's going to be smaller, but it's also going to be more relevant, and we'll hopefully be able to, once it becomes more efficient and leaner, generate revenues that are required to be able to reinvest in the business. You cannot have a healthy and productive energy industry without healthy service providers and suppliers. You just can't. They've got to be healthy enough to be able to innovate. And so that's, I think, where we will be once we lean out a little bit, and that workforce becomes increasingly focused on digitalization, data analytics, and automation, and becomes safer then.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, sort of having fewer people in the field makes it hopefully a safer environment if you have the automation systems that are functioning and reliable. Exactly. Very encouraging to hear you say smaller, more efficient, more relevant, and then more profitable. So I'm wondering, can you sort of give, so particularly with the remote working, we've heard a lot on from other companies in the past recently about the surprising gains they achieved from seeing their workforce working from home. What sort of experiences are you hearing from your member organizations about remote working, and how's that going to carry forward?
A lot of them have adapted to that. Again, they see the safety benefits there with having, a lot of workforce from home instead of out, whether it's in the office or in the field. A lot of efficiencies gained there as they return. You mentioned, we're seeing the market return a little bit for various reasons recently, just this past week, but we are seeing a return in demand. And these companies have learned how to be so incredibly efficient. That workforce, I think, will continue to see some kind of remote situation. It will be applied differently across the board. I know very few companies that are all in the office full time now. And it's a great move because historically, in terms of I don't want to say benefits, but company culture, we were a little bit behind. You saw 10 years ago, everyone was really jealous of Facebook and Microsoft and the way that they had these, really cool campuses. Not everybody had to be there, and a lot of benefits. But we're trying to get there too. And this only drove us there faster with this workforce. So they're going to continue to be more efficient. And I think we'll continue to see some kind of remote situation for most all companies. Oh, I can't hear you.
Thank you. Okay. There we go. So yeah, I think what you were saying there is very true. It's being reflected by a lot of companies, and so in terms of that remote working practices being more or less permanently established in some way. So again, just turning back to the energy transition piece and technologies from traditional technologies from oilfield services transferring into these renewable sectors and that sort of thing. What are you seeing there? What are your member companies telling you around that piece?
I'm seeing a lot of investment, for example, NOV, historically capital equipment, very invested in efficiencies there. They have great opportunities in wind, very engaged in, because that supply chain is so similar, they can do a lot in offshore wind as far as providing equipment. I see a lot, Technip FMC, very involved in hydrogen development, definitely in a lot of their subsea equipment and a lot of that emerging technology. They're very focused on hydrogen. Baker Hughes, carbon capture, from the get-go, they've been talking about that for a really long time. Similarly, Schlumberger, New Energies, all of those companies are showing us how they are diversifying. And that's just the larger ones. The smaller ones, we're working with the company Milestone Environmental, and they're doing great work with waste on the well site. And they're able to remove carbon sometimes, from the dirt. It's just amazing to see how every company, whether they're large or small, is working to get to lower carbon. And so we see it as part of our role to help promote that and promote how these energy technology companies, these service providers, these suppliers can assist their customers in getting to lower carbon. They're just going to help increase everyone's achievements there.
Good. I mean, that's so you mentioned all the hydrogen and the wind and stuff. So what about geothermal? There's a lot of talk now about oilfield service companies moving into supporting geothermal operations. Are you seeing much evidence around that?
I'm hearing about it. I think it's an emerging thing that we're just hearing about, and we'll have to see. I don't know which companies specifically are involved in it, so I'm hesitant to say and be incorrect. But I think they're all looking at those opportunities, and that's one that people really feel like could be commercially viable. And so they're all kind of looking at that. And again, that's the important piece of all this. It has to be commercially viable. We have to be able to generate revenues and to remain profitable companies. And so the opportunities that are the most commercially viable, that have the highest opportunity for return, are going to be the ones that stick with these companies. And that's how the market should work.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that sort of lower carbon technology shift that you've been talking about, and sort of becoming leaner, more relevant, and more efficient and more profitable. So that's sort of the move we're seeing, and that's what you're saying about what you're seeing from your member organizations. So in that sense, I guess it tells us how technology can apply to the newer renewables, and how young professionals can see a future for themselves in that new space.
Yes.
So just from that note, and sort of pivoting slightly, yesterday was International Women's Day. So, you're a very recognized leader in oil and gas in the oilfield service sector, an advocate for oilfield services and now the energy services. So what do you say, choose to challenge? What do you say to that?
I loved yesterday seeing, just even on LinkedIn, everyone's choose to challenge. I mean, there were so many hands raised. The way that we look at it is I think it's important that we articulate that we recognize we have a long way to go, and that we can continue to get better. And I love seeing the realization of that. Historically, sometimes, especially in oilfield services, maybe there was a tendency to be like, oh, we're great. We're good. We're doing it just fine. But with each increasing year, I see more focus on not only diversity, but equity. The racial equality issues and everything that our member companies are focused on right now have just made me so proud. When I came on to this job, with Legacy PESA, I've been there for 6 years, and there were no female board members. And that was my first mission. I was like, we have got to get a better pipeline for women to be leading here. And so, we started with our committee chairs, recruiting, female oilfield leaders to be chairs of our committees. And then they would come to the advisory board, and then they were elected to the board, and developing a pipeline. It takes a long time, but if you're focused on it, it happens in a very organic, fantastic way. And so one of the happiest things I saw yesterday was, we had a list of, our 25 women that are members of our board, our advisory board, our committee chairs. And that has just been such an empowering and amazing thing for me to watch and drive. We developed a D&I survey across oilfield services about 4 years ago. Had a committee that took a toolkit out of what came out of the survey, built this toolkit, and sent it to all our companies and said, here's all the things you can use to get better on inclusion, diversity, and equity. And they're implementing those things, and they're reporting how much better they're getting and how many fewer women they're losing. There are silver linings to every cloud. And in this remote environment, we have lost a lot of women from the workforce for sure. But hopefully moving forward, some at least part-time remote situation will allow for an easier way for women who have so many responsibilities, whether it's being a parent or taking care of your own parents, and to be able to balance a career that's fulfilling for them. And I see companies caring about it. And it has just fulfilled me so much and made me so happy to see that yesterday. So
yeah, absolutely. Great to hear what you're saying there. And yesterday when we had an SPE Live, we talked about this gender challenge within oil and gas, and particularly recruiting and retaining women in oilfield services and the operating companies. So you mentioned there a toolkit that you developed under PESA, and now obviously incorporated within the new organization.
Yes.
You also mentioned we've seen a significant drop-off of women in oilfield services because of COVID. What are the concrete actions you're going to take next as an organization to say to your member companies, we have to drive numbers of women up in a healthy way within your organizations? What do those concrete steps look like?
We put together an entire curriculum to improve diversity and inclusion in our member companies. So a lot of our member companies are enrolled in that. It's a year-long program, and it starts at the beginning of the year, and you take actual tangible, activities away from that. And some of those things are, learning how to review resumes, blind resumes. So we're taking the name off completely of every resume that's reviewed. So giving them a blind review. Their, exit interview strategies. There's implementation on, parental leave, moving away from this is our maternity policy. No, we need parental leave for moms and dads to have some equity in caring for a newborn. We have there's just a list of things you can implement to help support your member, your workforce. We're assisting companies in setting up employee resource groups. Yesterday morning, I was pleased to join the Women's Employee Resource Group at Baker Hughes. And there were probably 400 people on this call. It was fantastic. And an employee resource group is critical for a number of different communities, and not just women. And so the toolkit shows, even if you are a very small company, whether you have 200 employees or 200,000, here's some things you can implement to retain women and to attract women and to attract a younger workforce. So those are just some of the ones that are on there. I could do it at length. I could speak to that, but I'm happy to send a link and an overview and all of that, because I want every company to have access to that, because I care about every woman working, not just our member companies. It's just great information to share.
Yeah, please share that with us, and we can share with the audience and the SPE members and the wider later. Absolutely. Really encouraging to hear what you're saying there about empowering women and supporting women in the workforce in that way. So thank you for that. And thank you for explaining to us what this new organization is and where you are taking the service sector next in terms of energy transition and further oil and field services. So thank you very much for sharing with us today. Very encouraged. So I'm looking at an optimistic future. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for asking and for letting me come on the show, Nils.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a real pleasure. So thank you very much. So coming up tomorrow, we will be talking to Eman Hill, from the Executive Director from IOGP. So IOGP represents the operating companies in oil and gas. So it'll be another part of the table in terms of energy transition and what happens next in oil and gas. And then on Thursday, we have an exclusive talk with Schlumberger about coil tubing, drilling operations and projects there. So looking forward to that. That's coming up this week. So thank you very much. And Leslie, once again, thank you very much for joining us here on SPE Live today. Wish you a wonderful day. Thank you very much. And
thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thanks. And thank you, SPE Foundation, for making this possible. Thank you. And thank you, Asha, our producer. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks. Bye.